Time WWE champion, The Miz has had quite a journey in WWE over the years. But during his early days, few could have seen him.
I believe, bro, when we look back at The Miz career, I don't know where I actually saw I heard someone say something like this. He said something like, when The Miz is all done with like his WWE career, when you look at the accomplishments he's had. Hey yo, what's popping everybody? Today I'm back with another reaction video. I'm gonna be looking at self-made wrestlers. I'm talking about wrestlers who actually like maximize like their screen times, their TV times to actually make something out of themselves. So I'm gonna be looking at this video from Wrestling with Andy, bro. I'm gonna be looking at this one. Hope you do check out Wrestling with Andy. Can give him a start, give him
Sometimes
a like.
wrestler will
But anyways, chat, let's get into this.
get lucky in their career in that they'll be afforded all the opportunities to succeed. Just look at recent acts like Roman Reigns or Braun Breaker, people with strong family connections, if you need an example of this in action. But not all performers can be so lucky. No, some might have to fight to become a success, with them doing so by maximizing every minute they're given. And it's those people we want to look at today, the self-made figures of the industry. Beginning with our first entry, Danhausen. Now, Danhausen is a guy who really should have never made it as far as he has, as in another time period, his gimmick would have been seen as too indie, too one-note to make it to the big time. But this was not a reality the Detroit native was willing to accept for himself. No, he'd be determined to prove his naysayers wrong and turn himself into a very marketable act. How would he do this? Well, the first way would be by creating his Munsters-esque character of a demon who's very nice, very evil, with the logic being that he knows if he's too evil, then people won't like him. What a turnaround that was then from the early work of Donovan Danhausen, the man behind the face paint. After all, during his very early days, he'd be a lot more of a generic creator wrestler on the Midwest indie
Why does that other guy look like Kit Wilson?
circuit. But once his alter ego was developed, things changed as he suddenly got a lot of attention for his comedy act in places like Ring of Honor. So much attention would he get, in fact, he'd eventually be signed by AEW, where he'd serve a role as mascot of the Best Friends. Sadly though, for a variety of reasons, Danhausen's time in All Elite Wrestling would end with him no longer being booked. And that made it seem like he might be done in terms of being a TV act for a while. So how did he end up in WWE then? Well, it's been rumored that it was a push made by his real-life friend CM Punk. And once Punk was able to convince Triple H to bring Danhausen in, he'd proved to be something of a merchandising machine.
Oh, nice.
Yes, ever since his debut, the demon with a
ever since then, I thought he was a vampire. I didn't think he was a demon. I actually thought he was a vampire. So, I think Danhausen's like whole character, bro. It's actually like so peak, bro. And he's on SmackDown right now, yeah. He's on SmackDown, yo, dude. His entire gimmick, bro. The presentation, bro. It's so funny, bro. I think like when I see Danhausen, I think of like gimmicks like the Undertaker's gimmick, you know, like those kind of like supernatural gimmicks that are like not supposed to work, but they do work. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, but bro, Danhausen is such a blast, bro. Ever since he came into this industry, ever since he came to WWE, bro, dude, I think he's been the most like consistent wrestler I've seen since he actually debuted like this year, nah? Since he debuted, he's been the most consistent wrestler, bro. I've actually watched.
Love for jars of teeth has been able to establish himself in the WWE and, against all odds, become a prominent part of the show every week. Yes, it's a testament to Donovan's ability to maximize every minute he's had that he's where he's at today, basically in the role of this generation's big comedy act in WWE. But what about the prior generation's equivalent? Doesn't he deserve a spot in this video too? Why, yes he does, and that's why he's our next subject, R-Truth. Of course, it should be noted here that R-Truth was a great wrestler back during his peak years. Anyone who's ever seen his work as Ron Killings over in TNA will be able to attest to that. But being a great wrestler doesn't always ensure you're going to be a big star. No, for his first run in WWE back during the Attitude Era, it had very much felt like Vince McMahon didn't really know what to do with the North Carolinian, and so he had used him very sparingly. But like with Danhausen, Truth would not be content to turn into a simple flash in the pan. No, he'd be determined to use every segment he had to make sure he stood out. So it was then that during his second run in WWE, the former NWA World's Champion would lean into his funny side. Why did he do that? Well, because at some point he figured out that there were a lot of great wrestlers in WWE, and so it was harder to carve out a niche for yourself that way. But if he became a comedy goofball, WWE's premier comedy goofball in fact, he'd be pretty much guaranteed a job for life. And that's exactly what happened as, over the nearly 2 decades which have followed, R-Truth has been a regular fixture on both Raw and SmackDown, with him usually anchoring comedy segments like the antics of the 24/7 title division. So beloved would this make Ron Killings with fans? In fact, when he was cut from his contract in June of 2025, the backlash was strong and immediate. So strong and immediate that the company would be forced to rehire him mere weeks later, with WWE CEO Nick Khan having to get personally involved to handle negotiations. And this has now set a precedent where we're pretty sure TKO wouldn't try to fire Truth again. No, he's maximized his minutes to such a level that he's now indispensable to the promotion and will likely be there for as long as he wants to be, collecting a nice paycheck and entertaining fans whenever he's called up to appear on TV for a goofy segment. Really, he's got the dream job in many ways at this point, and he's not the only person who feels like a lifer in WWE now, given how long he's been there and how firmly rooted he's become in the whole operation. No, we could say the exact same thing about our next subject too in many ways, the man who goes by the name of The Miz. That's right, from reality TV star to multiple...
the moments he's had, I think The Miz is gonna go down as like one of the iconic wrestlers we've ever come to like see on our screens. Like I instantly remember like that moment with Daniel Bryan, the SmackDown moment, and then I remember when my hand goes up, your mouth goes shut, bro. The Miz is so iconic, bro. And I'm The Miz, dude. Like his. I even remember his IC title runs were actually like pretty entertaining. You know, I think he was one of the people in WWE who could play the sneaky dastardly heel like to the T, bro. Like I also like the fact that he can also be like kind of like a tweener sometimes, or be like almost a babyface. But I think The Miz is more like a heel than a face, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, The Miz's career is gonna be so legendary, bro. It's already legendary,
coming as far as he has. Hell, few would have expected he'd last more than a few months at this early stage in the game, as he was notoriously unpopular with his peers to the point that he'd at one point famously be forced out of the locker room. Why was this? Well, the feeling back then was that, coming from things like MTV's The Real World and Tough Enough, Mike Mizanin wasn't a real wrestler. Rather, he was just a tourist looking to use WWE as a springboard to greater fame. Obviously then, this meant he was going to have to prove himself. And that's something the Ohio native set about doing, as using every minute of screen time he had, he did everything he could to convince people he was serious about wrestling. How would this work out for him? Pretty great, as not too long after this he'd be welcomed back into the locker room. Even then though, the perception was that this was not a guy who was ever going to be top guy material, as he didn't have it in the same way as real stars like John Cena or Dave Bautista did. But again, The Miz would prove people wrong over time by reaching that very level. Come on now, this is a guy who ended up walking into the main event of WrestleMania 27 as the reigning and defending WWE champion. And while he might have ultimately been a third wheel here in the larger feud between John Cena and The Rock, he still won that match, beating Big Match John at the biggest show of the year. What made Vince McMahon trust him so much? Well, Mike Mizanin had by then shown himself to be a man who could do whatever was needed of him. It didn't matter if it was something like main eventing the Showcase of the Immortals or representing the company at a Make-A-Wish session or an autograph signing. He was
like like when I used to like watch wrestling like back as a kid, bro. I think when I think about someone I used to genuinely hate, I think it was The Miz, bro. Like The Miz would play the heel role so good, bro. I used to hate The Miz so much, bro. Like up until probably I was like kind of like 18. I think that's when I was like, oh, he's cool, you know.
Always going to be there, and he was always going to be a professional, with him never once causing any kind of scandal for the territory over the decades. Really, he's the perennial model WWE superstar, and that means he's always going to be one of the first people called upon whenever there's some kind of PR event happening, as the company knows he can be trusted. Yes, maximizing your minutes isn't just something you do in the ring. Really, when you're in a big league promotion, it's something you have to do behind the scenes as well. But we've talked a lot about the men so far today, so let's talk about the women instead for a while, as there are certainly plenty of them who have also maximized their minutes in WWE to turn themselves into a bigger star than anyone could have expected. And if you need a perfect example of this being the case, you need only look toward our next subject, Chelsea Green. Seriously, what a success Chelsea Green has turned into. And it's certainly not been a result of WWE having big plans for her. No, this is a reality she's pretty much been forced to create for herself. Come on now, during her initial run in WWE during the late 2010s and early 2020s, she was considered so insignificant that when she was part of a mass wave of cuts, barely anyone batted an eyelid. So how did things get to the stage they're at today, where the Canadian is often one of the women who get the most TV time every week? Well, that's a result of her taking each segment she's had and making the absolute most out of it. And what she excels at the most is the comedy side of things, much in the same way Danhausen does. And in becoming the goofy heel of the ladies division in WWE, she's gotten very over with fans, to the point that at stages, she's almost turned into a quasi-babyface of sorts. One who has even won a variety of titles over the course of her run. That's right, it would be in late 2024 that when WWE was introducing a new Women's United States title to help give the growing mid-card of the SmackDown Ladies division something to fight over, Green was pegged for the spot of inaugural champion ahead of a lot of others. And that's not the only belt she's held during her second run in the now TKO-owned territory either, as she's also held tag team gold in both WWE and their sister promotion, AAA. Hell, when it comes to her AAA run, that's arguably even more impressive, as no one is ever going to think of Chelsea Green as a luchador. So for WWE to think of her when they wanted to send a main roster star down to boost that brand, it says a lot about how much they have trust in the British Columbia native. And it also says a lot about the man who was her tag team partner when she was in possession of the AAA mixed tag team titles, our next entry, a man who's exceeded even the wildest expectations for himself in WWE, Ethan Page.
Oh, okay.
Now in Ethan Page, what we have is a man who's always been a very solid wrestler, something which has been evident across his runs in places like TNA and AEW. But in the latter company in particular, it felt like he was very much hitting a glass ceiling. So when he decided to make the jump to WWE in the spring of 2024 to appear as part of the NXT brand, the assumption was that the same thing was going to happen, and that he'd probably end up staying on the developmental brand forever as a performer who could help build up the younger generation. How wrong we all were then, because almost immediately all ego would jump to the top of the pack, with him proving to be better than almost everyone else on the show. So good would he be here, in fact, he'd win not only the North American title, but also the NXT World title at one point. Truly at this point, if you were listing the success of AEW to WWE jumps, then there's an
that win, the way he won like the NXT champion was kind of crazy, bro. I've never seen a finish like that. I think ever I've never seen something like that, bro. Ethan Page's character is like all ego, and then he then says it's not ego, it's it's confidence.
Argument to be made that Ethan Page is behind only Cody Rhodes and CM Punk. Who could have foreseen this being the case a couple of years ago? But it's the way things have worked out, and it's led to Page finally getting his main roster call-up recently as a full-time member of the Raw roster. Where will he go from here? Well, it's not unreasonable to think he might get a run as Intercontinental Champion before all is said and done. And if that happens, it really will forever confirm Ethan Page as an incredible success story and an example of someone who truly maximized their minutes. But let's move away from him for now and back over to the ladies again for a second. As it's there, we find our next subject, another recent NXT call-up in the form of Jacy Jayne. Now, if we flash back to the days of NXT 2.0, then we'll be there to see Toxic Attraction, the top female stable on the show in 2021 and 2022. Making up their ranks were Mandy Rose, Gigi Dolan, and Jacy Jayne. As you would expect then, given that Rose was already an established main roster act here, and considering the indie cred Dolan had, Jayne was a very distant third in the pecking order. Flash forward to present day, however, and the New Jersey native is the only one still in the company, with her now leading her own stable named Fatal Influence. How did things get to such a point? Well, it didn't happen overnight, as during those early days, Jacy Jayne was still very green in the ring. But in biding her time on NXT and using every opportunity she had for screen time to improve herself in the eyes of fans, she'd gradually work her way up the rankings. So high would she go, in fact, by the time 2024 came around and both Rose and Dolan were cut from the company, the Lady of Rock and Rumble would be leading that aforementioned new stable of Fatal Influence. And once she was established in the role of leader, she'd take things a step further by winning the NXT Women's title from Stephanie Vaquer in May of 2025 in a shock upset. But even that wouldn't be the peak of Jacy in NXT, as after losing the gold, she'd end up winning it for a second time, with the second win firmly establishing her as the new top dog of the division. So come the summer of 2025 then, it was safe to say she'd long since exceeded any expectations people had for that young rookie from Toxic Attraction back at the beginning of the decade. And this eventually caught the attention of Triple H to the point that when he was looking for new roster members to add to the SmackDown roster in the spring of 2026, the two-time NXT Women's Champion would be right at the top of that list. How has Jacy Jayne fared on the blue brand since then? Pretty well, as it happens, because after setting her sights on a big target in the form of Women's Champion Rhea Ripley on night one, she and the rest of Fatal Influence were able to establish themselves as part of the main roster very quickly. So it looks like her future in WWE is going to be very bright moving forward. Will it be as bright as our next entry, though? Well, let's find out by looking at them next. Someone who's done more in WWE than most could have expected of him already, Joe Hendry. Why do we say Joe Hendry has already exceeded expectations? Well, because at surface level, he's very much a meme wrestler, something which often has a short shelf life in the industry. But in managing to stick around for as long as he has now, the Scotsman has been able to prove any naysayers wrong who thought he'd never make it beyond TNA. How has he done this? Well, by continuing to use his minutes to keep fans engaged in him, whether that be via his on-screen antics or his off-screen ones. That's right, Joe Hendry is another guy who gets the idea that being a successful wrestler is about more than just what you do in the ring. And this is something he's proven during his days in the Impact Zone. As it was there, he got a lot of notoriety for managing to rocket his theme song all the way up to the top of the UK download charts. As you would expect then, such a move caught him a lot of extra attention, and it led to TNA eventually putting their world title on him. By that point, however, it was clear Carlos Silva wasn't going to be able to hold on to the Edinburgh native for much longer, because as part of WWE and TNA's working relationship, he'd already started making appearances on NXT, and at one point had even showed up at WrestleMania 41 to answer Randy Orton's open challenge. So it was only a matter of time until he became a full-blown WWE roster member. And when this happened, he'd continue to use every segment he was a part of to make sure he got over, to the point that he'd win the NXT World title in February of 2026. Where is he going?
He had an incredible run so far. Hey, Joe Hendry's he's had like an incredible run so far. You know? Like the NXT champion, TNA World Champion, he was at one point he was the most polarizing superstar in WWE with the say your name and he appears
on from here?
He was over.
Well, since dropping this gold, Joe has gotten a call up on the main roster along with other peers of his we've already talked about today, names such as Ethan Page. And that has seen him become a permanent fixture on Raw.
Yeah, he's
Really, at this stage then, he's truly proven himself to be a self-made wrestler, one who might even end up going bigger still by winning some singles gold on the Red brand before all is said and done. Yes, by this time next year, we could be talking about Joe Hendry as an Intercontinental Champion. And
So
if
that
that
was an
happens,
F.
it will put him in the same air as another cult figure who held a mid-card prize not too long ago. Our next entry, as it happens, a man who has also made quite a name for himself in recent years, L.A. Knight.
Yeah.
Seriously now, during the 2020s,
Yeah,
LA
Jake-
Knight has gone through quite a career trajectory, with him going from member of the NWA roster to undercard comedy act on WWE TV to one of the most over figures on the
Yes,
entire
sir.
show at one point. And to reach that last stage, he really had to maximize his minutes, as the company themselves were never going to put him in such a spot. Though the rise of the man formerly known as Max Dupree is pretty much all down to him getting so over with fans during whatever screen time he had during those early days. How did he get so over? Well, that was largely down to his promo skills, as sounding like a cross between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, he was able to capture the attention of the WWE audience en masse. So much so that even when Vince McMahon damn near buried him with the aforementioned Max Dupree gimmick, the business manager of the Maximum Male Models, he was able to get this goofy gimmick over. And that eventually created a situation where he even began flirting with the main event scene by challenging Roman Reigns for the undisputed WWE Universal title after it became clear audiences were more than hungry for it, they were rabid. No, L.A. Knight wouldn't win this match, but he would be rewarded with a consolation prize not too long after when he got a run as United States Champion. And for a man who at one point seemed doomed to be nothing more than a manager to an undercard comedy act, this was quite a turnaround in fortunes. Hell, it was proof positive that, if you make the most of what you're given and show your bosses that you're simply undeniable, you might be able to break through that glass ceiling as a self-made man. Sure, he might never win that elusive world title, but that's almost beside the point, as what Sean Ricker has been able to do is make himself a star when few thought he could ever reach that level in WWE. And if we look elsewhere in modern-day WWE, we'll find another performer who's on a similar trajectory at the moment, as they're currently in the process of riding a wave that's taking them from comedy undercard act to something more. Who are we talking about here? Why, Kit Wilson, of course. Now, Kit Wilson wasn't exactly nothing on WWE TV prior to his most recent gimmick, as his tag team with Elton Prince, the one known as Pretty Deadly, was a fun enough duo. But even then, it was clear there was a very definitive ceiling to the whole thing. And the reason we say that is because, in a company which rarely treats tag team wrestling as a focus at the best of times, this pairing was always going to fall way behind other more prominent acts like the Usos or the New Day. Thankfully then, for at least one half of Pretty Deadly, the London-born half of the pair would get an unexpected boost in his profile in 2025 that took him to new heights.
Actually, no, wait,
Sure,
wait,
his
wait, let me give you my 2 cents, gang. I actually don't think, like, Pretty Deadly would have fallen behind. I think as soon as, like, Elton Prince comes back, like, I don't know, is he released or not? I think he's released. Nah. I think he is. Wait. I think the gimmick would have worked. Like Pretty Deadly versus like the New Day. I think would have been a nice match. I think they never gave it like a runway. You know, something to latch onto and start maybe a feud or something. I think they didn't give them like enough TV time, in my opinion. Maybe I might be wrong, but I think that's how I see it.
Partner would have to get injured for this to happen, so it was a bitter pill in some ways, but Kit Wilson didn't let the opportunity slip away from him when it arrived. No, when he was tasked with portraying what at first seemed like just another undercard comedy gimmick, he made the most out of it and was able to rise higher than anyone could have ever anticipated. What was this new gimmick exactly? Well, it was a modern man who didn't like the idea that so many of his colleagues were showing so much toxic masculinity in the workplace. Despite it seeming like it probably wasn't going to go anywhere at first, this quickly caught on with fans and turned the Englishman into a bit of a cult sensation. Sure, a part of the reason for that was because of the theme song, a catchy pop song which audiences were only too happy to sing along with every time Wilson came out through the curtain on an episode of SmackDown. But another part of the reason was because he was able to commit himself so much to the role in such a convincing manner. Because he did that, it felt like he was having fun with it whenever he showed up on screen. And this made it easier for fans to have fun with it too as a result. Honestly, it's never going to be a world title level gimmick or anything, but given how it started, the fact it might end up seeing the Londoner win a mid-card strap one day is saying a lot about what he's made of both it and the minutes he's been afforded on TV over the past few months. Of course, you don't have to be on the main roster to make the most of your minutes in WWE though. No, as people like Joe Hendry and JC Jane have already showed us, you can do the same thing even if you're down on the NXT brand. Hell, in some ways, it's more important to do it down there, as this is the level where you're effectively auditioning for a main roster role every week. And in recent times, few have maximized their minutes down in developmental more than our next entry. Who are we talking about this time?
Grace.
Who else but
Grace.
Ariana Grace? Yes, Ariana Grace has already achieved more than many fans expected. How did this happen? Well, like with everyone else we've looked at today, it came as a result of her maximizing every opportunity she had to show what she could do on screen. And this didn't have to be during matches either. Rather, it was always going to be her character work as a comedic goofball of her division. But then what else would you expect from the daughter of Santino Marella, someone who was, for many years, WWE's premier comedy goofball alongside R-Truth? It runs in her family to play into the funny side of things more than anything else. And this has seen her slowly start to rise up the ranks of NXT over the past few years as she's gotten more and more established within that system. Hell, as things stand right now, she's a prominent member of the Birthright, a stable made up of second-generation stars of tomorrow like Uriah Connors, the son of Fit Finlay, Lexis King, the son of Brian Pillman, Charlie Dempsey, the son of William Regal, and Channing Stax Lorenzo, someone who's just kind of snuck in there under the radar. So she's regularly being featured on TV every Tuesday. But it's not just Tuesdays that Ariana Grace has been featured on as of late. No, as part of WWE's working relationship with TNA, she's been able to go over to the Impact Zone at times as well, with her there working directly alongside her dad. And taking this opportunity and using it for all it's worth, she was even able to rise to the top of the mountain on that brand for a while by beating Lei Ying Li to become Knockouts champion. Sure, it was a somewhat short run, with it mostly being used to further the idea that a group of NXT performers were invading Impact. That said, it proved that even if it was on a smaller brand, the Ontario native could be trusted with some top gold. And this has to put her in better standing for winning a title back over in WWE one day. Will this actually happen? That remains to be seen. But even if it doesn't, Ariana Grace has already used the TV time she's been given to its fullest in order to start her rise up the card. And that's a lesson every performer should be heeding, as it shows that, even if you aren't initially pegged as someone who's going to be a big star in WWE, if you make the most of your minutes, you can become a self-made wrestler. Someone who forces the company to do something more with you, just like everyone else we've looked at today.
Damn, that's true. Yeah, I think that's it. It's kind of funny, like, seeing all of these wrestlers, like, building, like, from ground zero and, reaching certain heights, bro. And I do believe they will, like, reach more heights depending on what their individual, like, companies are giving them, like the TNA or WWE or whatever the company they are on. It's like giving them to work with. I feel like they might even surpass where they are right now, and kind of like LA Knight. I actually see LA Knight as a, like, world champion. I see Ethan Page as a world champion, not just a mid card. I see Chelsea Green holding probably, let's say, a women's world champion. I would actually love to see that, bro. Maybe he wins it, like, via the Money in the Bank. I actually would love to see that, bro. But anyways, gang, I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see y'all in the next episode. But now, deuces, ooses, I'm out.